Hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I've got a tag for, I suppose, Tag Friday. It's the Don't You Forget About Me tag. It's a relatively short one. It's created by Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl. I think it was inspired by a video that Brian from Bookish made. I was tagged by a couple of people. I was tagged by Joshua from Joshua Crebo, a brilliant channel. If you like poetry, then I think you'll very much like his channel. Yeah, he's got quite a few just really lovely videos. And I was also tagged by James from Quaint and Curious Volumes, and I feel like he's being left out if I don't say he has lots of lovely videos and a lovely dog as well. There are only 4 prompts to this, but Jolene has said that you can use as many books as you want for each prompt, which is normally what I do anyway. So I've got a few books to talk about, and I'm going to do my best to give you a rough idea about the book in question as well. So I'm not just holding up a random book and not really saying anything about it. But it is a book about forgetting, and so there might be some books where I have less to say than others. And I think that's where we start. Number 1, clean slates. Books you've read that you don't remember anything about. I've got 3 books for this prompt. I suppose really I remember something of all of these, but effectively I barely remember anything. The first is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I can remember reading this. I can remember. I was going to say certain scenes. That's not quite true. It's really certain settings, and I don't know how much it's the descriptions of certain places, or whether it was just my mind filling it in, because I remember so little. I don't know which it is. And I can remember it jumps sort of backwards and forwards in time. You've got a dystopian society where so women have very little rights, and you have these handmaids who I think the main idea is they're just there to create babies, and that's basically it. But then it also jumps back to how that came about. Can't really remember exactly how it came about. Can't really remember much of actually what goes on in the book generally anyway. And so it'd be one to reread eventually. Yeah, it'd be nice to fill in some of those blanks. Next up, this was a book I was really quite excited about before reading about it, and I was looking out for it for a long time. And I think when I heard about it, it had just been translated into English, and the hardback had come out, and I heard about it in that weird interim where the hardback has been out but isn't really around in bookshops anymore, but the paperback hasn't been released yet, and so I couldn't find it anywhere. And then eventually the paperback came out, and it's called Nervous System by Lina Meruane, translated by Megan McDonnell. And it's about a woman and about worrying about things. I think about a medical diagnosis that she receives, but also the only other thing I can really remember, apart from again the odd scene that I've sort of put together, just the way I imagine the living room in the apartment where she lives and things like that. But I seem to remember there's a fair bit about her father and her relationship with her father, and her father being ill and being hospitalized, I think. But again, I can't remember too much about it. It's written in a very mixed up, sort of fragmentary style that when you're reading it, it doesn't feel too experimental. And I was actually expecting it to be a bit more experimental, and so I was a little disappointed in that respect. But again, I'd like to reread it and fill in the blanks. And then a totally different kind of book. This is Monty Down to Earth, and this is basically a gardening basics book. He's just giving some of his best advice about gardening and where to sow certain plants and where to have other plants, plants that grow well in shade, and how to lay out your garden, different jobs you might need to do at different points of the year. And it's got all these pictures from his garden, which is massive. and yeah, I remember enjoying it, and it's one of those books where as you're reading it, you're sort of trying to plan your own garden. And there are a few things I must have taken away from it, but I'm a very haphazard gardener, and you only have to look at my garden to see just how little I've remembered from this book. So I could do with going over it again, and when I have the time, really going over my garden again. The next prompt is Genie's Lamp, books you wish you could forget. And this was the one prompt that I found the most difficult, because I don't find myself wishing I could forget books that much. I think even if I don't particularly like a book, it will probably end up either just being inherently forgettable, um, which I suppose is the worst case scenario. You want to read something that's worth remembering, um, or it's kind of useful to remember it in a way, because you sort of know which kind of things to look out for, which kind of things to avoid as a reader. But I thought of one book that I wouldn't mind forgetting, but it's not necessarily for negative reasons. I wouldn't mind forgetting everything I know about Absalom by William Faulkner. And I read this last summer for Faulkner in August, an annual reading event where folks read Faulkner in the month of August. And we read this, and I can just remember at the time I was having trouble with my eyes. I think just the summer and the light weren't getting well with my eyes, and I needed a new glasses prescription, and there were sort of things going on that made reading this book quite difficult. And although I do remember a lot about the book, and I enjoyed it on the whole, there's a part of me that just wants to forget it all and just start from scratch and read it under totally different circumstances, and just take it in. With different memories attached to it, I suppose. Because I think of this book, I just think of feeling uncomfortable and having headaches and having to put the book down and do something else. And I'd rather not be remembering that when I think of the book. Number 3 is Forgotten Gems, books you think need more love. I've got 3 books here. None of them are really, strictly speaking, forgotten gems. I think quite a few people would know about most of them, but they're books I really like, and they're books that I suppose I wish I could talk about more, and I kind of wish were talked about more. The first is just an author in general, and I'd love to see if there's more of her writing in English. This is Silvina Ocampo and her sort of selected stories, The Imposter and Other Stories, and this is translated by somebody, by Daniel Balderston. Ocampo was a friend of Borges, and I think also of Adolfo Bioy Casares as well. They're sort of in the same sort of social milieu. Um, and there's certainly a similarity between her work and Borges, although I think sort of stylistically these are more normal stories in comparison to Borges. Um, but there's that weirdness to them, and that um, yeah, just that strangeness. She's quite surreal in quite a lot of them. Um, and one of my favourite books, if I remember correctly, I'll see if I can find the title. One of my favourite stories in the book is called Autobiography of Irene. And if I remember it correctly, the main character, Irene, is an old woman who I think is losing her memory. Um, and if I remember correctly, she's sort of trying to piece it back together and um, I don't know, maybe potentially be seeing it as the life of another person. I can't remember exactly what the sort of framing device is, but um, I can remember it being a sort of someone looking back on their life, but with the complication of um, losing your memory. I think there is a surreal twist to how that works as well. But she's just a really, really fine writer. That I think the New York Review of Books also has a selection. This is from what's the name of the publisher? Serpent's Tail. This publisher, but New York Review of Books have a selection, and it's I think "Thus Were Their Faces." I think is the title of it. And that story, "Thus Were Their Faces," is also in here. But just a really great short story writer. That I suppose when great short story writers, great 20th century short story writers come up, um, yeah, her name is rarely mentioned or never mentioned, at least as far as I can tell. Next up, this is a great book. I need to read. I think there's another two books in this series I need to get to. It's Wildwood by Colin Meloy, with illustrations by his wife, Carson Ellis. And it's just a great sort of urban fantasy about a girl and either her friend. Yeah, I think it's her friend. They get lost in the woods, um, sort of trying to find her baby brother. So there's a bit of sort of labyrinth thing going on, and there are probably lots of other sort of echoes of other sort of fantasy and other literary works in there. And it's just great, fun, middle grade um, fiction, sort of I don't know, echoes of things like Narnia and stuff like that. But I think the thing that makes this really great, as well as the just the story and the fun of it, and the illustrations from Carson Ellis, which I really really like, and the whimsical flavour of it is I think the vocabulary, which I think is probably quite important for a middle grade book. There are lots of odd little words in here. Colin Meloy is the lead singer of the Decemberists, and their lyrics often have a quirkiness and a sort of literary bent, and it comes across in the vocabulary here, but it never feels um, dusty. It never feels as if it's inaccessible. Instead, you're sort of just being introduced to this wonderful, rich, quirky world of language, and that's one of the things I really love about the book. So yeah, I need to read the rest of the series at some point. And another one, this is on my mind because we've just had Saga along, which is all about sort of Norse and Icelandic sagas. Um, and there are other kind of writings from other parts of the world, and there's one I've got here which isn't really that far away from a lot of these Norse and Icelandic sagas, and it's the Táin Bó Cúailnge, which is an Irish tale saga, something like that. about a cattle raid, and essentially it's sort of more or less kind of like one tribe stealing another tribe's prized bull, and a war breaks out, and there's all kinds of weird magical stuff going on, and it sort of gets to the point, if I remember correctly, where I think it is Ulster need to be defended. Who is it? Is it Ulster attacking or Ulster? No, the Ulstermen. That they're stricken by a curse, so their army can't defend them from. Is it the forces from Connacht, and so it's just their one hero, Colin, who is essentially like the Incredible Hulk, and so he has to sort of fend off this army. There's amazing over the top violence. You get Colin's backstory about how he gets his name, which I think means lover of hounds. The coup there, I think, means hound. It's similar to the Welsh for dog as well, key. I think it's the root for the name Connor, which you don't need to know, but I find interesting. Um, but I just love this. It's a crazy, over the top story, with some really odd characters. I'd just love to reread this. This is the Kieran Carson translation, and I think as sagas and sort of stories of that ilk goes, it's one of the best that I've come across so far. And then number 4 is Forget Me Nots, and this is books you will always remember. I've got 3 books that are at the moment seem to be etched into my brain. The first is A Kiss Before Dying by Ira Levin. It's a kind of thriller, kind of dark, psychopathic kind of thriller, and it's about I suppose a family with 3 daughters, and a man who meets one of the daughters, starts a relationship, and then you realise that he's not really in it for the relationship. He wants to get at the father's money, and so he's just sort of using this relationship as a way to eventually get there. You kind of piece together that motive as it goes on, but the book opens with this young woman. I think she's in college, that he's in a relationship with, and she's found out that she's pregnant, and he's pushing her to get an abortion, and she doesn't want to, and that's the sort of tension that the book starts out with, and essentially he, realizes, well, there's either the abortion or the baby, or there's the third option of killing her, which is what he goes with, and then there are 2 sisters left, so it's not the end of the world for him. So it's very twisted, very horrible, and it's one of those ones where, as he's turning up in different contexts, he's kind of turning himself into a different person, and it just makes you feel slimy and horrible. But there's just something about this book that hasn't left me. And I can remember when I read it, I started it, I think in the early evenings, just before making dinner. Then after dinner and the washing up had been done, I picked it back up and kept on reading and kept on reading and kept on reading, until it had gone dark, and then it wasn't dark anymore. And I just read through the night, because it was so gripping and, I suppose, so disgusting. I had to work out how it ended. Not that I can't remember it being particularly graphic, but just that sliminess of the character definitely stayed with me. Another one where it's really the world of the book that I think, in a way, still stuck in, and that's The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which is set in a medieval monastery in Italy, and essentially a monk and a young novice just turn up. And as they've turned up, there are two things going on. The first, and by far the most fascinating thing, is that loads of other church authorities are going to come up to have some theological disputes. And then the other kind of inconsequential thing going on is that a series of murders have just broken out in the monastery, and people are panicking about them. They think that they're signs of the end times, and it's mysterious. It's a lot of fun as well. There's a forbidden labyrinthine library that has one of the best collections, if not the best collection, in all of Europe. And as a reader, you're just itching for the characters to finally get in there and see what it's like. And it's just a brilliant book. I really loved it. I only gave it 4 stars, if star ratings really mean anything. I think if I reread it, I'd give it 5 stars. And I have a feeling that every time I read a novel by Umberto Eco, between that novel and the next, I will reread The Name of the Rose. So I'm constantly sandwiching my Umberto Eco experience with a reread of The Name of the Rose. Maybe we'll see how it goes. And then the last book, and this is I suppose a bit of a liberty, because it's a book I only finished a week, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And it's The Stronghold by Dino Buzzati, translated by Lawrence Venuti. And again, I think part of it is the setting of this book in a remote stronghold up in the mountains, overlooking a plain, a desert, which is sort of enemy territory. This stronghold is on the border, and these soldiers that spend the whole time there, in a in this fortress that's not really seen as that important by the rest of their fellow countrymen down in the city, and yet they're there, and there's that constant possibility that one day the enemy might turn up. But yeah, just quiet, eerie landscape. Just found it fascinating and kind of disquieting. But I really enjoyed this book, and it's one that after a week or two, I'm seriously reconsidering rereading already. I think I'll try to wait a little bit, and but I might reread it maybe even before the year is out. But that's it. That's my Don't You Forget About Me tag. I did my best to talk about some different books, to throw in a few that I feel like I haven't really talked about that much, because sometimes with tags the temptation can be to just throw in the same old books, and so I've done my best. If there's anything interesting in there, or if you've read these books and had a totally different experience, I'd love to hear about it. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.